So my name is Andrew Prentice, and one of my functions at Atlassian is to manage the performance engineering team. And today we're going to do a talk about performance tuning. And it's really quite exciting to have Joanna here, because Joanna was at Summit last year and heard George Barnett, who is one of our performance engineers at Atlassian, talk about performance tuning and how to get the best performance out of Atlassian applications. So it's always great to get someone to actually talk about real-world experience and how they deal with that issue in their context, rather than us sort of, preaching from a podium, really. But for those of you who weren't at Summit last year and didn't see George's speech, I'm going to recap on some of the key points there in terms of the environment, changes you can make to get better performance, and then I'm going to hand over to Joanna. Okay, so we're going to talk about performance tuning for Java applications, Atlassian applications. I'm going to talk about how to get your apps to run faster and some tuning ideas as well. Always with the performance, context is everything. So the results that you see are going to depend on your environment. I'm not going to get exactly the same results that I'm going to be talking about today. With that in mind, it always pays to test your changes in a test environment before you deploy to production. So first of all, I'm going to talk about how we did the testing. Then I'm going to talk about the must-have improvements, and then the things that are worth doing. And if anyone's reading through the slides, Harvey is not some new open source performance improvement tool. That's actually a typo in the slides. It's probably not a good thing to mention at this point that I also manage the QA team at Atlassian. So first of all, the contenders. So these are the boxes that we were running our tests on. So we have three. You might get a theme in the names. This is Wally. It's a 3-4-year-old box. It's sort of at the low end of the scale. It costs about $1,500. Next up came Johnny 5, which again, same era, about 3 years old, but it's more of an enterprise level box. Cost around $4,000. You can see the details there. And then we had Eve, which is a more recent enterprise version of Johnny 5. So in the context, we're testing Jira 4, MySQL 5 on Red Hat, Java 1.6. We're using a copy of Jira.Atlassian.com, which is our public instance of Jira. So there's about 70,000 issues there, 80 projects, and we're using JMeter to simulate load here, about 30 requests a second. Well, in the graphs that I'm going to show you, most showing average response time in milliseconds. We're not including the browser time in this because that can distort things. And the arrows show if lower or higher is better. I'll call out if we're talking about something different. So on to the must-have improvements. Gratuitous Photoshop. So the first thing to do is we strongly suggest that you upgrade from Java 1.5 to 1.6 if you haven't already. There are a lot of advances in the JVM and the compiler in Java 1.6 that get performance improvements out of our applications. And they're also able to make better use of modern hardware. So if we're looking at Johnny 5, which is our middle box, upgrading from Java 1.5 to Java 1.6, we're getting an almost 6.5 times improvement in average response time. In addition to that, we're seeing about a quarter reduction in CPU usage as well. So faster responses and less usage of the CPU. So the reason for this, there are hotspot VM updates in 1.6. Again, advances in technology that enable us to get these improvement gains.
Do you see any difference between the 32 versus the 64-bit JVM?
We do, but it depends on very much on the tuning. We've got some documentation up on confluence.atlassian.com, so do a search there, you get the details there. If you want to know more about the nitty-gritty, about what's happening in Java 1.6, there's some have a good white paper to read up on there. So it's not just moving from Java 5 to Java 6, it's also incrementals within Java 6 as well. So here we've got Eve, which is our newest box, moving from 1.6.07 to 1.6016, and we're getting a 7% increase in response time, or a 7% improvement in response time just from that update. That's because there's a couple of revs to the hotspot in those subsequent releases.
Linux, Windows?
This is Red Hat Linux. Yeah. So hardware upgrades. Again, upgrading to newest hardware, we're getting hyper-threading, quick path interconnects, the NALEM CPUs, and memory throughput. So here, again, Java is a bit of a memory hog, so that always improves our performance. So we're getting a throughput increase from 6.5 gigs to up to 21 gigs a second. So the hyper-threading allows the cores to run more threads simultaneously, and the quick path interconnects allows your cores to communicate to each other more quickly, so you're getting improvements there. So just an explanation of hyper-threading, people don't know. So CPU is processing one thread until it hits a cache miss, and has to go out and to memory, at which point we can schedule another thread to run on that CPU. So you're getting basically two threads running on the same CPU. So with these hardware upgrades, comparing, we've got Wally, which is our entry-level box on the left, going to Johnny 5, and then up to Eve. So we're getting 8 to 12 times improvement in response time from hardware upgrades.
Were you holding the amount of RAM constant across those?
No. So I think Eve's got 32 gigs, and Wally had 8. So what we're also getting is improved garbage collection throughput as well, so up to 3 times improvement as we go up through the different boxes. So garbage collection, if you're not familiar with that, it's the way Java's JVM manages memory. So new objects are continually created, and garbage collection is the process of collecting those dead objects and reclaiming the memory. So if you look at on the interwebs, there's a lot of tuning guides about this. We wanted to have a look at, do they actually offer significant improvements, or are the defaults saying, what should you do? So we had a look at that, and there's different garbage collection processes you can use. So you can concurrent mark sweep is the one that a lot of tuning guides recommend. Parallel new serial old, I think is the default one that you get in Java 1.6. But what we're comparing here is parallel new, parallel old, and we're seeing a 2 times improvement there, especially on the older box. So concurrent mark sweep is well, I'm just going to remove Wally from that slide there, so you can see the difference on the newer boxes. So concurrent mark sweep is a non-stop the world garbage collection process, so it tries to do it concurrently. Parallel new, parallel old is a stop the world process, so it'll pause the JVM, clear out all your dead objects, and then restart. So configuring your JVM to use that gives you improvements. So overall, tuning guides, the defaults are saying we recommend parallel new, parallel old for garbage collection, and concurrent mark sweep prioritizes low pauses over CPU usage, but we see that can lead to heap fragmentation. We've seen instances where, for some customers, it's so bad that their garbage collection is taking about 45 minutes. So that's something to avoid. Next up, a lot of people ask us about virtualization and how that has an impact on performance. So we want to have a look at, does that hurt, and can you manage the risks? So here we are comparing on real hardware against VMware ESX 3.5 and ESX 4i. So we can see there's about 43% improvement if you're running on real hardware. But the point to point out is the average response times. We're still looking at 170 milliseconds for a response time, which is not too bad. So,
Can you please go back? Yeah, so the physical machines, how much is that?
on the left, it's about 100 milliseconds. So on average, it's about 30% slower.
So if you go to the 3.5, actually, 4i is taking more. Yeah, the newer,
Yes.
The newer is slower, you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
It's kind of strange.
Yes. Is anyone from VMware here today? No? Okay. I can't answer that question. So on average, about 30% slower. And under extreme resource starvation, we are seeing it becoming markedly slower. So if you're running a high traffic instance, we do recommend that you use real hardware rather than virtualization. We do have some documentation on this. So again, if you want to read more details, go to confluence.atlassian.com. Yep.
Future plan, of course, is going to be that you're going to work to optimize to run VMs. I can get hardware if I need to, but it's going to take some work because our whole data center is
Right, so it's not something that we're ignoring. I don't know, there's a lot of requests out there for a long time about whether we actually support applications running on virtualized platforms.
2 years I've been doing it.
Yeah, so that was a lot of customers were doing it even though we didn't officially support it, and we did provide support. That's about 2 years ago, I think we came out and officially stated support for that. So it is something that we are still focusing on, and it is a priority within the performance engineering team. Okay, so that's the must-have improvements. Now, a couple of things that are worth doing, possibly. Gigabit, all right? So gigabit is faster, but if you're not doing big transfers, are you going to get any benefit from upgrading your infrastructure? Well, it turns out you do, and it's really to do with the latency. So for here, we're getting about 10% improvement in response times. Now, this might not be stack up in terms of cost versus benefit for you, but if you are looking for that extra pop, performance out of your systems, this is one way to get it. So it's because there's this lower round trips times on gigabit, and really that's communicating to the database. Every time we have to talk to the database, which for Jira is fairly often, you're going to get an improvement. But if you don't upgrade your cables, you can replicate or get the same sort of performance gain by putting your database on the same box, if you have enough CPU. Right? The other thing is we find a lot of customers have their development environments do have gigabit networking. So if you can move your Jira instance onto that same network, then you can get a lot of the same benefits.
Was the VMware Linux as well?
Yes.
So having the host and VM server, I'm saying if you host both components on one single server, would it be better than hosting on individual servers?
Yes.
VM and
Yes, if you can get your database and say your Jira instance on the same box, you're going to get that similar improvement. So it's not just on the response time, but also the bigger improvement for Jira specifically is on re-indexing time, where we really hit the database hard. So here we're getting up to a 26% improvement. Yes.
Do we get better performance improvement if we have a virtual appliance for MySQL, for example, as a database, which is optimized just for databases? Do we get better performance compared to them VM appliance, MySQL appliance, or the database on the application server itself?
You're saying if you're going to get better performance of the databases on the server in terms of response time here. We actually haven't done a lot of testing of databases as appliances internally in Atlassian. So if you want to come and speak to me afterwards and provide details of the appliances you're using, we can add that to the list to see if we can schedule dedicated testing for that in. Okay, heap size tuning is another thing we get asked a lot. Does this make a difference, and can we over-allocate memory to our applications? Can we drown Java with too much memory? Turns out you do get a benefit. So here we're looking at Wally, which is our low-end box. And as you increase the RAM, you're getting about 23% improvement in response time. However, so this is on Johnny 5, our mid box. Again, large improvement. And for Eve, similarly, 28% improvement. But what we're noticing is that it's very much diminishing returns. Right? So
that memory is the machine's memory or memory allocated to JV?
to the JVM. Yep. So there are diminishing returns. So we think the optimal is around 6 gigabytes. Anything beyond that, you're probably better off spending your money on something else.
So you must be using 64-bit JDKs to allocate heap traces that big, right? Multiple in one JDM?
Yeah. So if you heap size too small, that's bad for performance, but too big, it's not going to be detrimental to performance, but you may not see a good return on your investment. Lastly, the other thing that we get asked a lot about is about SSDs. Seems to be the rage at the moment. I mean, they're fast, they're expensive, DBAs seem to love them. Doesn't make a difference. So if you're browsing issues, no, not really. But if you're creating issues and hitting the database again, then you can get some improvement. So again, it's really more about the database. We use Lucene, and it caches a lot of things. So for when you're just browsing issues, you're not going to get much improvement there. So things to remember is definitely upgrade to Java 1.6. Definitely buy the hardware that's best suited for your context. Use parallel garbage collection with a big heap. Remove virtualization if you're having a high traffic instance, if you can. And optionally, gigabit network and SSDs are certainly nice to have, but perhaps not always necessary. So that's the sort of a few tips and advice about the general environment things you can do. But really a great pleasure to hand over to Joanna now, who's going to talk about some of the things that she's done to improve Jira performance at Polycom.
Okay, here we go. Can you hear me okay in the back of the room? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, great. So thank you very much for this opportunity. While Andrew's presentation was really technical about performance and all kinds of performance measurements and tuning that they do, what I wanted to do is talk about specifically what we did in our world for Jira at Polycom to improve performance when we heard George Burnett's talk last year. So we went off and did an upgrade and what we were able to achieve. That's a part of the talk, and then another part is what you can do on the Jira side to improve performance from an applications perspective only. So that might be good for some new shops that are just starting out in Jira startups, and maybe what pitfalls to avoid. So again, I'm from Polycom, and I'm a system administrator there for Jira. So this is why we want to have this talk, is because our Jira looks like that little house in a storm, or at least it did last year when we were before our upgrade. So hopefully that'll help you. But the first motto is step one in any recovery program is we had to admit to ourselves that our Jira had become unmanageable. So I'm a Jiraholic. I'm Joanna. So the contents here is performance considerations. Thank you. Performance considerations, hardware and software upgrade that we did, Jira and plugin upgrades, and structure for scale, which is the other part. Is there like do you guys hear it? Do I need to move this over? My sound? Okay. Okay. So this is what our Jira looked like after 5.5 years. It started at the beginning of, maybe you can't see that, but that's hay on top of a truck. And here's why. Because we have 210,000 issues, which wouldn't be so bad, but 142 projects, 66 workflows, 320 custom fields, 6,000 users in a directory, and about 400 of those are concurrent. 400 to 500 are concurrent daily, pretty much 24/7 because we have a global operation. So when you are looking at whether you need better performance and usability, or these are different factors.
6,000 are active users, or you got the dump from LDAP?
No, not dumb from LDAP. These are users we've had in there, so we do delete some users, but some of these are terminated. But some of them are occasional users, because our Jira is a public Jira, so we have customers coming in and entering feature requests. So some of those are occasional users. That's why the 400 or 500 is 400 average concurrent user concurrency. And by the way, if you think your question is specific and you're too shy to ask, we will be here for questions after the talk and in the decompression room. So total issue count matters, but so does user concurrency together. The complexity of your configurations matters, and then any other integrations and plugins that you have coming into Jira. So these are all different things that you have to take into account when you're looking at your Jira. One thing in general, though, is Jira uses the disk a lot more than the database because it's using Lucene indexing, and if you do a write operation, it's going to write to the database, but it's also going to write to the Lucene index. It's also going to read the Lucene index. So it's very I/O sensitive. You want to consider that. But it also needs considerable memory. It's particularly for how we run it and because of the user concurrency and the configurations. So in summary, this is a hard slide to read, but let me just highlight the red didn't come across. 4 things I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail. This is what our before and after look like for the server. An HP DL580 and a DL380 G7, 4 dual core processors, so we'll talk about that versus 2 6 cores. We went from a RAID 5 to a RAID 10 with a 512 megabyte cache to a 1 gig cache, and we went from a 3.5 gigs for Jira to 6 gigs for Jira allocation for memory. So those are some of the things I'll talk about now. We chose to RAID 10 over RAID 5 for better performance. So at the expense of disk space, we went with the RAID 10 configuration with 1 hot spare, and that's much better for us. We upgraded our controller from a 512 meg cache to a gig cache, made a difference. And then we chose the 12 CPUs, really not so much for Jira, but for concurrency, so that we can run our database on the same server as Jira and still have enough power to run the database. Our memory upgrade, we went from the 3.5 gigs allocated to Jira to 6. So Andrew mentioned that. We found that full garbage collections became slower and less frequent. Times lower and less frequent, sorry. We freed up a lot more memory for Jira in general, and we, more importantly, eliminated the out-of-memory errors that we used to see in our previous configuration. So, oops, it doesn't actually do what I thought. So before, we had our full garbage collections were taking not 40 minutes, but they were taking sometimes 50 seconds, which is still quite a bit when you've got 400 users in there pounding at it. And they were happening about once an hour, to now we're only seeing 3 to 7 seconds full garbage collections and less than 4 or 5 times a day. Then our average usage went from 3.25 to 3.5, and we've got a lot more free memory throughout the day. And more importantly, we have no out-of-memory errors, so we don't have to go in there and restart the app and deal with angry nerds. And okay, so our software upgrade. We run on SQL Server 2008 now, R2. We found it's fine to run Jira and database on the same server and still have enough power for them both. We just learned to allocate sufficient memory to the database. For us, it's about 2 gigs. And the story about using the latest JDBC driver and JDK. We run on 1.6 Java. The JDBC driver, the story is we were working with customer to write a customization for our Jira and kept seeing all kinds of weird, they were writing a service and a listener for us for something that we did. And we just kept running into a whole bunch of issues that it took us hours and really a couple of days to try to get over, and all of a sudden realized that just upgrading the JDBC driver fixed that issue for us. So in the end, we didn't spend even more time trying to figure out exactly what it was in the JDBC, but we realized there was a newer version, and using it helped us to basically resolve the problem for us. So if I had known that and had it, then we could have avoided a couple days of work. So what's the bottom line for users? Is they have a need for speed, and nothing is fast enough for your team. So bottom line, this is what we got after doing our hardware upgrade. This is all the back-end positive basically performance that we got. Total reindex, as Andrew mentioned, is a big thing. So once you upgrade hardware, we went from 60 minutes to 25 minutes, pretty considerable. XML backup, quite a long time, for 30 minutes to 4.5. I'll talk about that later, though, too. Index optimization, that's one that runs on schedule in the evening for us. But basically, it was taken 7 minutes, and now it's 25 seconds. So we were getting index exceptions, where basically the data between the index and the database is not synced up. So you're getting kind of data integrity errors. What's actually in the database is not what the user will see. But that's all on the back end. Nobody really cares about that. What the users really care is that they get a 34 or 50% improvement in their UI, the creating and finding issues. Yeah.
Can you go back to XML backup?
Yeah.
There, towards the end, would you get page cannot be found, or you would get some successfully backed up message?
We get successfully backed up. It just took a long time. It took a lot of resource power. If you wanted, and really it wasn't. It was, once the backup started to when it finished, it was kind of obsolete, and then we'd start again an hour or whatever, 2 hours later. So one of my recommendations you'll see is not to go that way. If you have if it takes your instance that long, then you should go with native tools, which we were doing anyway. Now we've just moved over to native backup tools. So so now on to some other things as far as performance. And scaling really to making sure that your Jira is keeping up with what you've got with the demand for its performance. One is we faced over the years several challenges with various plugins we've deployed. One had a terrible memory leak, so basically every couple of days we ran out of memory. This was early on in Jira, which has been around for 5.5 years. Another one is in 3/4 of our workflows, and some of you may know, but I'm not going to name. We thought that workflow plugin was not going to be supported any longer, so we panicked. So it's kind of a lesson we learned of how tied we are to something. We had a different plugin that caused an odd behavior during Jira 4.1.1 upgrade. And the fourth one is there's a performance issue for us with our data set with a different plugin. That particular plugin and our data set don't play well together. So the lesson here is just in general, and especially if you're starting out and you like everything in the plugin exchange, which is great, or you're hearing stuff. Not that I know anything bad about the ones that I've presented today. I'm sure they're wonderful. But in general, as a rule, scrutinize what you're going to put in there and ask yourself these things. Is the plugin reputable? So is it just something that somebody came up with Atlas Camp while they had a couple beers? Or is it something that's going to be around? Will it be supported? How widely is it going to be used at your company? Does it perform well, the plugin itself? Does Jira perform well as a result of it? Do you really need it? And does it possibly introduce other bugs? And if you can say yes to all this, then go ahead and get it, but just keep up with the release because you're always going to get fixes and performance tuning in each of them. Hopefully, I don't have to tell you to test in a QA environment before you deploy anything into Jira production. And again, test, test, test. So now on to why you'd want to be doing a Jira upgrade. So hopefully you're all excited about Jira 4.4 and you're going to go out and get it and upgrade. But I know it takes some shops longer. But here's why, just from a personal or a specific example of Polycom. You do get performance improvements and key fixes in each release, which are both for end users and admins. So I read the release notes religiously, looking for the stuff that they've fixed if I wasn't aware of it already. Like Jira 9, I wrote a limerick about that at a user group, and it won. I'll tell you at the end. No, because we were waiting for that. We're a global shop, and people have asked that all. They expect that. Why? So I'm excited about it. But not just for end users, for admins too. And here's an example: in-place DB upgrades in 4.3. For us, because our database is that big, our upgrade was taking 12 hours to do the XML import and export for an upgrade. Now with in-place DB upgrades, I tested that. We haven't quite done it yet, but I tested it's going to take me less than 4 hours. So that's a big deal on a Friday night, because this is what I looked like before. And this is what I look like now. So much cooler. Why else would you want to upgrade? Fewer internal support calls, really, trust me on this. Less time to resolve them. That means with Atlassian, it's easier for Atlassian to help you because you're on the newest release. So I know that some of you might still be running 3 something or other, but Atlassian's more up with the 4 versions, and it's just a lot easier for them to set up an environment if they have to and resolve an issue for you. And then the early bird gets the worm. This could be interpreted the wrong way, I realized after I put this in here. That doesn't mean that if you're an early adopter of 4.4, then you're going to get all the bugs. That's not. I was actually trying to say something to the contrary. What it means is if you're able to, this is a great partnership with Atlassian. They're giving you the early release. They're giving you the beta. It's your chance to say, hey, I like this. I don't, this is not working out. So basically, you're getting the benefit of at least getting it in-house and doing an install and seeing. And that's what I did with 4.3. We're not up on 4.3 yet because of budget and et cetera, because we need to upgrade our plugins. But it really is beneficial. So our last Jira upgrade really rocked. These are people from tonight's U2 concert. I got the early picture. Did you know there's a U2 concert? Okay.
Much better party at Thirsty Bear.
Oh yeah, but Thirsty Bear was much better. That's right. Sorry. Okay. We resolved 4 bugs found internally. This is Polycom bugs that our engineers found that really annoyed them. So these aren't just bugs all over the world. We internally at Polycom delivered 5 must-have features, resulted in 25% fewer support calls, and my favorite, I am not writing as much SQL because we had JQL. So basically, these are just some of the things that we found. On to structure. Configurations, less is more, which means you want to, Jira can be a victim of its own flexibility. the more you customize all the schemes, permissions, configurations, the more that Jira has to keep up with those, all of those, and keep them in the cache. So sometimes you got to be a little bit more stringent and not let all of your users have exactly everything they wanted. You got to put some standardization. So try to use fewer issue types, resolutions, statuses, custom fields. Notice this is for startup Jira. So basically, if you're just getting Jira in-house within the last half a year or a year, you're looking at some of this. What do you do with all of that flexibility in Jira? And I'm telling you, less is more, basically. Use custom field context versus new fields. Hopefully that means something to you. Instead of always just having a new field name, use a custom field context, because eventually all of those extra fields are going to be, you're going to be paying for them somewhere, either in confusion on the part of the users or on Jira performance. Use a simple workflow and apply to many projects. So if you go and get the 4.4 beta, you really can design a great workflow, and users can see it, and then just apply it to as many of your projects as possible. We didn't do that 5 years ago, so now we have 67 workflows for 140 projects. But we're slimming down. Another thing, and I have a little slide to explain this in case somebody's new to this. Project roles came out, I think, in 3.13, maybe, yeah, okay, somewhere in the 3. Project roles came out, and some people are so confused. This actually saves you in a lot of schemes. Here's why. Before, you might have a permission scheme for project 1. Let's say that in the administer projects role, in the administer projects permission, you had a group called project 1 admins. And in the edit issues permission, you had a group called project 1 team. So you would have such a permission scheme for every one of your projects, because of course you're going to have different projects working, or different teams working on different projects. With the after, you're basically going to administer projects having a role called project role administrators, and in edit issues having a role of developers. Now in each project, there are project roles that now say, okay, so who are my administrators, who are my developers that are specific to that project. So with this the after scenario, your global permission scheme is reusable. So basically, you've got only one global permission scheme, and your specifics for that project are all captured in the project roles. Now, if you're an epic Jira, like we are, so that means you've been around for a while and you've already inherited some of this madness, what you can still do is you can still go through and consolidate any schemes that you possibly can. Atlassian provides you some scheme tools that are built into the admin menu. As an example, I heavily use a scheme comparison tool for notification schemes and permission schemes. It just shows them to you side by side that, here's where they're similar, here's where they're different. It really easily highlights it for you, so you can try to consolidate them. There's a group to project role mapping tool and a couple others, so look into those. Archive projects, and before you get all excited, there is actually no hidden such feature yet, but but there is something you can do, at least from a usability perspective. So we created a set of schemes that we call archive. Basically, the workflow only has like open and closed in it. The permission is nobody but the administrators. The notification scheme is nobody, and then we put them into these archive schemes. So basically, they're still in a database, but they're not visible to all of your users. So when they look at the create menu or the search menu or the browse projects menu, they no longer see projects that are no longer being used. So that's just a little tip that worked great for us. And then I use SQL heavily just to identify different items for consolidation. So you can quickly take a look for yourself and say, okay, how many, we've got 360 custom fields. How many are they really used, and in which projects that they use? So it's a simple 5-liner SQL that shows you that. And that's how we find. So we declutter stuff. We do that by creating project naming conventions. Out of 144 projects, they're all grouped into about 6 or 7 project categories, and all of the projects start with the name of the category. So if you know in your project menu, you can just get all kinds of stuff, and it's hard to find, especially for new users. So we have a convention that helps. Nothing to do with performance, but just with managing the scalability of Jira. Eliminated and consolidated custom fields. So we were using the SQL I mentioned before. We were able to get rid of just flat out 25 of those fields. We took custom fields out of global context, so they're no longer searchable for everybody in the simple search menu, as an example. And we were able to eliminate issue type, statuses, and resolution choices by looking how frequently they're used and again, merging together. We tidy with this thing called the super user plugin. He should be the fourth superhero on today's presentation, right? This guy, where was he? So if you're not familiar with this plugin, super user plugin allows you to basically mimic a different user. It's a free plugin. You find a user in your user directory and you click on SU and now you become that user. And this is awesome for a lot of different reasons. One is to troubleshoot issues, for example. So I've got people that say I can't see something or whatever, I can't click on this button. I just mimic them and I say, oh, right, because you're not in the right permission or something. And then for us, this additional benefit is really big. It helps us terminate Jira accounts. What that means is when somebody's leaving the company, if you try to delete a user, it'll tell you you can't because he's 15 assigned issues and 30 reported issues, whatever. Well, that's all fine. So now you can't delete them, so you got to keep them in there. But maybe that guy had a whole bunch of personal filters and dashboards and things, and you could declutter that. So I go in there and I just delete, I nuke all those things. And on top of that, I delete their subscriptions, which if you haven't heard that, subscriptions are called the silent killer, which means they're going to be running whether that guy is around to get them or not. And they'll be clogging up your system, so especially if they had something running every couple of minutes, sending their reports to nobody's inbox. So I go in there and I just nuke all those. It's a little bit of an overhead for me, but it helps to keep Jira trim. And then we train, so we limit general permissions and train the users on how to use them, like bulk change, because you don't want people deleting stuff and running bulk change on thousands and thousands of issues during the middle of the day. I mean, realistically, it's going to take a hit. Create shared objects like filters and dashboards. We limit that to only some people, so again, you don't have everybody sharing with everybody else, not necessarily. And then manage group filter subscriptions for that subscription reason that I mentioned earlier. And then we have a few project administrators that we let them go and configure their project roles. We let them do their own components and versions. Hopefully you know about that. And then other super users, so they don't have access to the whole admin menu, but they're basically your folks that help other people make better decisions about how to configure their projects in Jira. I mentioned this before, so if your backup is like ours, it's taken half an hour, do DB-specific backups. So we do SQL Server backups now. You can get them more frequently. They're more accurate. They take shorter time, and it's easier to recover in a case of a disaster. So we recommend that. We schedule regular maintenance. So a couple times a month, I'll just restart Jira and clear up memory that way and get rid of some logs and all that. I do regularly check the logs for new errors I may not have seen. So every once in a while, a mail server was down, or the subversion repository was inaccessible, or something like that. So I can see that. I do read the Jira performance doc that Andrew mentioned, and it's got a lot of other good tips in there. And then we keep going and clean it up, basically. That's our last note. Oh, whoops. Whoops. I just have to press it once and it'll do it. So here was our, oh, wait. It's just not wanting to go back, is it? Okay, well, you're just going to get a word from my sponsors. The last slide said, step 12 of an EEC recovery program is all Jiraholics have to tell other people and help them to recover. And we keep on our path. And now a word from our sponsors. This is the small fine print in any medication you get, prescription drug is. Oh, it's not going to come up either, and I have to have it from, oh, there we go. No.
Well, you showed it. That's right.
Yes, it was Polycom is a leading company, but no, I have to say that. Wait, help. Is it just going? I have to, otherwise, that's my. No, then it's the next thing. Okay, here we go. Right, ready? Polycom is a global leader in unified communication solutions for the industry and the entire presence video, voice, infrastructure solutions based on open standards. Polycom powers smarter conversations, transforming lives and business worldwide. Please visit Migraines are side effects common, and older people should not consult their doctor, etc. Done. Okay, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.